Okay. Hopefully you don't need that one because it's broken. I've got a spare in my car.
Unaffected by. Okay.
For those of you on Zoom, can you hear us? Give me a thumbs up if you can.
Yes.
Great.
Hi, Jessica. I'm going to,
We're gonna get started in a few minutes here. As you know, folks wander in.
meeting in the township hall. So if you go to the chat, there'll be a link that you just click on and it'll take you to the right meeting. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay. Okay, so I'll just. Yeah,
Do you get a chance to bicycle much or do you mostly drive?
yeah, we are set.
I bike all the time. But not on roads.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
You mind if I sit back here with you?
Yeah.
Give it on.
Either right over or.
Way to go.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining, both in person and virtually. This is the public meeting for our Jackson Road corridor study.
Yeah.
And I want to introduce Jan, which probably most of you all know. My name is Eric Dreyer, I'm with OHM Advisors. We have the pleasure of working with Jan and Chris on this great little study on looking at Jackson Road, and we're going to tell you about what we've come up with so far, and I'm going to get some of your feedback on where we're at. You want to say?
Yeah, I just want to welcome people, and just as a little background, so funding for this corridor study, which is a complete street study, the majority of it came from SEMCOG. So we have a grant for about $40,000, and then the Board of Trustees added to that $10,000. So that's where the funding is coming. And after we received the grant, we put out an RFP, and OHM advisors were selected to be our consultants. And we started with a survey, and I think Eric will go over a little bit of the history. This will be our last sort of public engagement before they wrap up the study, which needs to be done by the end of June. So with that, welcome Eric and the OHM team and everyone who's on Zoom. Just for, there'll be a joint presentation. So the folks on Zoom and the folks in the room will have that same content. And then we're going to put everyone on Zoom in a Zoom room, and they'll get a presentation of each of the boards that are in the Township Hall and be able to give feedback, just as people who are present in Township Hall will be able to do that, the boards that are in the back of the room. So everybody will be able to kind of get the same content and have the same opportunity for feedback. So with that, thank you very much.
Okay. So, as Jan just mentioned, this is a hybrid meeting. This is kind of the new way of doing things. We haven't done this a lot up until a couple of years ago, but you know, we're able to kind of bring people from who aren't able to be here in person, people who are here in person. Both sets of folks are going to get the same content. It's just I'm going to go into another room and talk to the people on Zoom, and then you get to talk with all my lovely colleagues about all these interesting recommendations. So what we're going to do first is a quick overview of the project, high level overview of the recommendations. And then for those of you in the room, the detailed recommendations are in the back. And we'll talk about more of them for those who are online. So what we studied, we're looking at Jackson Road here. It's kind of the main corridor through Scio Township. It's where a lot of your commercial activity is located. We looked at this area that's kind of within the blue box as our study area to try to, that's sort of the area of influence. And we know there's been a lot of growth here. We've seen a lot of new developments, new sort of mixed use projects coming in. But there's been concerns about non-motorized safety, speeding, overall comfort of the corridor. Trying to think about these things holistically from not only just how do we make things safe for vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists, but how does that interconnect with all the other things going on in Jackson? The new development, with the desire for kind of a naturalized corridor. And making this a place where people want to be, not just a place where people drive through. So I think most of you are aware of Jackson Road. I think I've talked to a couple of you already about being part of this the grant opportunity. So, but for those of you who may just from our own observations, connecting Ann Arbor West, it's generally challenging to maneuver particularly if you're in a non-motorized or transit user. There's a lot of different styles of land use. We've got everything from kind of small light industrial properties to auto dealerships to grocery stores, Meijer, and big parking lots, to now more kind of high density residential units. And generally, when we look at the corridor, we heard from the community and from our stakeholders that there isn't really a cohesive kind of character along Jackson Road. It's kind of a place. It's a place that has some big box stores, and how can we use this study to start to influence Jackson Road and some of the sub-districts that you'll see in the maps as a place where it reflects the unique character of the surrounding community. We started this project with a couple of goals, both from the focus group committee and then Jan and Chris. But really the whole point was to take all of the previous planning work that's been done and consolidate it into like a single document that the planning commission, board of commissioners and others can look at and say, oh, okay, here's a project that's going on. What else do we need to consider as that project comes in, whether that's transit stops, mid-block crossings, improved landscaping along the corridor, safety improvements, and everything else that we looked at. Pathways, non-motorized connectivity is a huge piece of this, not only along Jackson itself, but within the neighborhoods and developments on either side, so that you can go from one end of the corridor to the other on a safe and comfortable pathway. We want to integrate a lot of the natural features of the surrounding area, a lot of the parks and preserves, start to integrate that up into the corridor, reduce the sort of overall look of concrete and make it a little bit more green, a little bit softer, more shade, better opportunities to suck up stormwater, and use that as kind of a defining feature of the corridor. And then this whole process itself, even though it's a smaller study in the grand scheme of things, this can kind of serve as a base for future projects, and get everything tied together in a way that the planning commission and others at the township can say, okay, our next project is this, and our next project is this, and sort of put together a list of what needs to come next. When we went through this project, we been working on it for about 6 months. We started with overall understanding what's out there, everything from traffic to safety to existing planning documents to planning commission or approved plan documents. Really trying to get a sense of there's all these different things happening. How do we consolidate all into one document? We worked with the focus group, the stakeholder focus groups, to set some goals for the corridor and what they wanted to see. That informed what we call the opportunities framework, and that is kind of throwing every idea at the wall to see what sticks. Not everything made it from that initial brainstorming session to what you see now. We know we only have limited time and funding and the ability to do things, but it was a good way to kind of brain dump everything that we heard into a document or a map that helped us organize our thoughts. That opportunities framework was narrowed down into some draft recommendations, and then what you see today are kind of final plan recommendations. The feedback we get from you today will help refine those even further. And if there's additional ideas that we may have missed or you want to throw out there, please write them down on the map, or there's a QR code on all the boards, and you can let us know via a digital survey. That's our preferred option because it's easier to go through and tabulate all that stuff, but the pens are out as well. Real quickly, some interesting facts that we learned as we went through that existing conditions process. Roughly half of the population in Scio Township lives within that blue box, about a mile on either side of the corridor. So you got a lot of captive audience there to sort of support things along Jackson Road. 8,000 people work within the study area, and about 3,100 go somewhere else for work each day. So you got a lot of people coming in and quite a few people coming out. You got a mix of land uses, generally auto oriented at the moment, big parking lots, office, multifamily, and commercial, but that's starting to change. See some issues with pedestrian safety. There's some sidewalk quality issues. There's some inconsistencies, and general maintenance in the winter. I saw some firsthand issues of folks trying to kind of walk through areas of snow-covered sidewalk with assisted mobility devices and having to go in the roadway to get out of the way or to get around it. You got public transit service. You got the wave and the ride. And those link up at a couple of different points along the corridor. And then I-94 is the barrier between the north and south half of the township. Yeah. Traffic volumes are not super high, but they're not super low. They're appropriate for this level of roadway. There's some congestion at key times, but it's not an issue that really needs to be solved with additional capacity. But what we see as a bigger issue is speeding along the corridor. And we heard that pretty loud and clear from our survey that I'll talk about. The major intersections, Z Road in particular, have higher crash rates. A lot of people going through there, and it's looking for some ways to improve the geometry of that intersection to improve safety. We have utilities throughout the study area and serving a lot of the development areas along Jackson Road, but we're kind of limited in volume. So you have to think about how we strategically improve those to support development. And then non-motorized improvements. Those are a big desire from the community to increase those connections between adjacent neighborhoods, from those neighborhoods to Jackson Road, be able to, walk to Meyer and get a gallon of milk rather than getting in your car to drive all the way around. But in order to do that, those connections need to be made. There needs to be some better protection, more comfort, and that maintenance piece that I mentioned. So we went out and did a corridor tour in February. See here, in the snow. I got a really good firsthand look of what's going on in the corridor. Got out, walked around a bit, took photos, but went from Wagner all the way to the end of the corridor, and it really gave some perspective about what is going on along Jackson Road. So when we think about our opportunities, we've got kind of a lot of the same things that we've talked about, but improving non-motorized safety was huge, or is huge. Increasing safety for all vehicle or all users at the major intersections, not just vehicles, not just pedestrians, but making sure that everybody can get through the zebra intersection without getting hit. Mid-block crossings were a big opportunity, particularly in the eastern end of the corridor where there's pretty consistent triple ATA service, making sure that if you get off the bus on one side of the street, you don't have to walk a mile to the next crosswalk. There's some opportunity to redefine the roadway space a bit and not only narrow the roadway down, but move bicyclists off the street and onto a shared use pathway that's safe. It's protected from, more protected from vehicles, but there's the right way to do that. And we have to think about how those cross major driveways and major intersections. We've got a pretty good existing planned trail network. We identified a few additional connections, but starting to build that out and looking at that network not only along Jackson Road, but on either side of Jackson Road as well. There's 4 priority development nodes: Baker Road, in front of Menards, Zeeb Road, and then the Quality 16 Cinema. These aren't all the development areas, but these are the areas that we saw as kind of key locations that could probably be supported here in the early next couple of years. We saw the need for a transit hub, transfer center, mobility hub, park and ride, whatever you want to call it. Similar to what's the ride currently operates out on Plymouth Road. And really facilitating connections between the wave. And then again, integrating that development and any new infrastructure improvements in a way that starts to draw up some of those natural areas to the corridor and soften things up and make it more of this also a parkway type experience rather than a gigantic expanse of concrete. So this is our second round of public engagement. Our first round we did mostly virtual with a couple of pop-ups. We got 330 comments from residents, and generally people live near Jackson Road. 80% of the folks who took the survey were kind of within that study area. And we asked questions about what folks wanted to see, what their vision for the corridor is, what are some of the main issues, and we heard similar to what we saw is that roadway safety, walking and biking. Are kind of the most important things to address. People want to be able to walk and bike along Jackson Road, but they don't feel comfortable doing it. Those vehicle speeds and some of the dangerous traffic patterns kind of are contributing to that, but then also the lack of connections and generally places for people to go. We need more kind of walkable spaces that folks want to walk to and don't feel like they need to drive. And so there's overall a desire for better bike transit options, more shops and businesses, more of this local flavor, and the desire to create that welcoming and attractive Jackson Road that people want to come to, and they come to for the day, and they spend, they park once and they walk to all their destinations, and then maybe they go back to Ann Arbor, or they go to the other side of 94, wherever they go, or they walk from their house. But there was definitely a desire from the community and from local leaders that this was the way that we wanted Jackson Road to start to move towards. So we broke our corridor-wide recommendations up into 5 different focus areas. These were based around some of the initial goals of the grant that was put out there, and trying to think about the corridor from a holistic point of view. We know that if you do improvements just to transportation, there's spillover effects that also should be taken into consideration. And with the goal to create more of this place where people want to be, we can't just say, let's go improve safety on the corridor. We gotta think about it holistically. So we have 5 corridor-wide or 5 focus areas. Those were development nodes and land use. Where can we start to think about how building in some walkable urban development would go. Transit access, so how do we get people to and from their bus? Environmental restoration and preservation, how do we continue to incorporate some of the naturalized areas next to Jackson Road into the corridor? Non-motorized access and pedestrian connectivity, and then roadway safety improvements. So thinking about the roadway, the infrastructure, and making it a place where people feel safe and comfortable out there using. So first, again, these are not intended to be fully baked in this presentation. We have the full detailed recommendations in the back, and we'll talk more about them with the folks on the call. But from a roadway safety perspective, the goal is to improve safety and comfort for all users, especially those vulnerable roadway users. So your pedestrians, your bicyclists, your transit users, people who may be using a wheelchair, anybody who's not surrounded by 2 tons of metal. And so our recommendations really focused on how do we slow vehicles down to the actual speed limit, safe operating speed. We're not saying we're going to take this to a 25-mile-an-hour road, but when people are out there driving 70 miles an hour, we need to get them down to 30 or 35. That's what's important. We need to reduce conflict points. So a lot of that has to do with what we call access management. And for those of you who know the corridor, there's lots of driveways. There's a high density of driveways in certain areas, and starting to create some consolidated access points for new businesses or when businesses turn over, say, yeah, you're gonna have a shared drive inside, but we're not gonna have 6 parking lots within 400 feet. Because every time there's a driveway, that adds however many potential places to get hit by a car or to hit somebody in a car, or hit a pedestrian or hit a bicyclist. So the more we can reduce those conflict points, the safer the roadway. We want to increase the visibility of non-motorized users, so that includes things like crosswalks, pedestrian lighting, rapid flashing beacons, which we'll talk about later. And then another just simple way to help reduce traffic speeds is showing people that they're driving too fast. It's not the most effective way, but it is just a cheap and easy way to put out a sign that says, hey, speed limit's 40 miles an hour here, if you're going 60, slow down. And it's a way that's been shown to show some improvements, but it needs to work in tandem with a bunch of other options. We talk about transit access. Our goal here is enhancing the functionality and comfort of the transit network. We heard from a lot of people who use the ride or use the wave, and have either stopped using it or don't use it as much as they would like to because they can't safely and comfortably get to their bus stop. And these are people who are commuting to Ann Arbor or to other places in Washington County, and just they really want to use it. They want to. They don't want to have a car, but they feel trapped because it's not an easy thing for someone to do to walk to a bus stop on you guys, especially if you're kind of a bit away. So some things that we heard from both our stakeholder group and the community and developed some ideas around were establishing a shared fare system. This has been shown in a lot of communities to help improve access every time you have to change fares or think about a different. It's $1 to ride one system and $2 to ride another system. That's just mental math that you don't want to have to figure out if you're just trying to get from point A to point B. Having that shared fare card would go a long way just to making it simple. I show my card, I get on the bus, I can get on the other bus. I don't have to pay 4 different fares to drive my car. I should have to do that to take the bus. We already know there is a transfer center in Meyer. It's tucked in the back. It's on the west side of the building. You wouldn't really know it was there unless you were looking for it. So we thought, let's take a bit of that parking space. There's a lot of parking on the west side of Meyer there, and try to create a little park and rides mobility hub that has some access, some parking for bikes, area for rideshare pickup, some parking spaces for folks who live in the area and just want to take the bus into downtown. And utilize it as a kind of simple and easy, visible connection for transit users. Paired with some wayfinding from Zeeb Road that are safe sidewalk connections out to the main streets. And just making sure that everyone's aware that this exists and you can use it. Aligning our mid-block crossings with all the transit stops. Again, you don't need to walk in a mile across the street. People are going to dart across the road because they feel like they need to. And then the ride has already been doing a good job of this, but continuing to implement kind of safe, comfortable waiting areas. So your shelters, your benches, trash cans, signage, anything that elevates the bus stop, particularly in areas that have some new development coming in, higher density residential, where you have a higher likelihood that folks there may be using this. Non-motorized access and connectivity. We want to improve options for walking and biking, both along Jackson Road itself and then into the adjacent neighborhoods. Filling sidewalk gaps, adding those mid-block crossings are 2 key pieces of that. I mentioned the pedestrian scale lighting. That's really more of a safety piece to ensure that pedestrians feel safe when it's dusk, kind of this time of day or later. Filling those gaps in the non-motorized network off the corridor. And then ultimately starting to think about replacing the existing sidewalks with 12-foot shared pathways. So pathways that can take both a pedestrian and a bicyclist safely off the road, and we can narrow the street to be a slower speed. Development nodes and land use. This is an interesting topic that doesn't quite tie directly into transportation, but an important piece to get folks walking and biking more. There's nowhere, you can have the best sidewalk network in the world, and if there's nowhere to go, then no one's gonna use it. So we want to start to think about all of these new developments that are planned and coming in. How can we make sure that what's going on, what's coming in has a feeling of being walkable, has something that evokes your downtown, your walkable mixed use node that allows for people to park once and walk to all their destinations. So we identified a couple of key areas. I mentioned those: Baker Road, Menards, Zeeb Road, and the Quality 16. These are ones that have had some either previous activity or trying to get something going. And working with the staff and with developers to establish some design standards that really promote this kind of walkability, placemaking way of development. One that brings in some of that local character and establishes a place where people want to be. There's some opportunity to kind of start to activate those nodes through some temporary uses like a pop-up farmer's market or some movies in the park or movies in an area that gets people excited about a certain place before a bunch of money is dumped into a development. And then something that I think you're on the front end of is thinking about how to support these developments. And there's a lot of ways to kind of bring in an anchor institution, an anchor restaurant, an anchor recreational facility, and finding the thing that is unique to Scio and unique to Jackson Road can do a huge is a huge opportunity to say, we got people coming here every single day, they're here all the time. Let's start to fill in around that and add in our supportive amenities and businesses. So one idea that we came up with was kind of recreational centers, and it's a new trend in, I don't want to call it a trend, but it's a new idea where you might have your youth soccer arena or something like that, and that's your target or regional draw. People are coming in daily to do pickup games, or the kids are playing soccer or whatever it may be, and then you start to think about it like a stadium where there's surrounding uses that allow people to go out to dinner after practice, or grab a drink with their friends on bar league night, or go to this soccer shop and pick up a new soccer ball, and it starts to kind of get that activity built up in a more organic way. And then finally, environmental restoration and preservation. We know that Scio is really proud of its called semi-rural character. There's lots of great parks and preserves. Put a lot of work into the pros plan. And we thought, looking at the map here, you've got this kind of big stretch of concrete in the middle of the township, and how can we turn that area into an asset? So introducing street trees both into the median and on either side of the street, not only for shade and stormwater management, but it starts to slow vehicles down as well. Some vertical elements, and people just naturally drive slower. Adding green stormwater infrastructure both within the roadway right of way and in front of developments, kind of in their front yard, as both an attractiveness and an amenity, but also again reducing the burden on the stormwater system. And then starting to think about Jackson Road as this green corridor, this parkway, where it's not defined by the minor or the big parking lot. It's defined more by the presence of trees and natural features that are kind of lining the corridor all the way from one end of the township to the other. And so generally overall, this plan is really intended to help guide the folks at Scio to take where we're at now and go over the next 5 or 10 years and realizing some of this vision. Got some near-term and some long-term goals for them. And each of these recommendations is going to work on its own. They're going to provide some individual benefit, but as you start to stack them on top of each other, And when you look at the map, you're gonna kind of see that there's groupings of improvements in certain areas. Those improvements are going to kind of build on each other. So once you have a development that has safe crossings across Jackson Road and nice big trees and landscaping and is safe to walk and drive down, that improvement is going to be it's a much greater overall return on your investment than just adding street trees. So co-locating those investments so that start in kind of a concentrated node and then it starts to spread out is kind of the idea here. Connectivity between individual neighborhoods and then along Jackson Road is key, making sure that people feel connected to the corridor. And then finally, again, that naturalized kind of character and natural elements to the corridor are going to help support your development, bring that character in, and make it feel special to the community. So that's a high level overview. We'll open it up for a couple of questions, but also know that when you're going through the boards here, you'll have folks from the team and you can really pepper them with specifics about, why any certain thing was selected, but I'm happy to answer a couple of questions here and then we'll sort of break out and, yeah. Good.
If you think about the Park Road,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on in different mountains. Medical care is going to come back there. And there's a library back there that people are slow to discovering. There's some connectivity to their pathways, but I don't know how it looks crossing the street there. I haven't physically crossed the street, but there's a lot of traffic turning into that area. Is that not? It hasn't already been addressed enough? Is the question I get.
I think if I know what you're talking about, we did address it, but
Can
Go
you
for it.
repeat the question? We on Zoom couldn't really quite hear her question. Thank you.
yeah, you said Park
Road.
Road.
Yeah, so if I.
Parkland
Parkland
Plaza?
Parkland Plaza,
Parkland
thank
Plaza.
you. Well,
Yeah.
Park Road was up there, but yeah, Parkland Plaza, there's just a lot
Yeah.
going in over there.
Yeah.
And I could see where if you took a bus out that way,
Mhm.
like getting across that part, I just think that might be one node that we might want to consider taking a close look at.
So the question was Parkland Plaza, the development that's going on in there. Have we looked at that closely? And the short answer is, yeah, we looked at it. We didn't recommend too much down in Parkland, just because of the scope of the project was more.
I think your question is more directed, how do people get across
Yeah.
Jackson Road?
Sure.
So
And
there's
that is a
bus
problem
And
for
they
that
have to
area.
get across, I just see that area busy.
Mhm.
There is a light, so you can do it, but.
That might be one of the crossroads.
Yeah.
Crosswalk, right?
So with the mid-block crossings and then pedestrian scale lighting, and even adding things like a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. Or hawk signal, there's ways that we can help slow or even stop cars there to allow a safer crossing, so. If we didn't already include that, circle it on the map and we'll definitely include that in our final recommendations.
Did you already define what a hawk signal is?
A hawk signal is, Adam, do you know? Oh, it stands for something. It's the overhead pedestrian crossing sign. It doesn't,
We do have a picture.
we have a picture of it in the back.
Actually, more of a signal, it's red, it's red, like a signal versus.
Get
red,
traffic to slow down people.
Well, hawk signals for high stop.
Oh, okay.
So
It's
they
more
will,
like a signal.
it's a way to get around adding another signal. It's technically a mid-block crossing.
Another traffic light.
Traffic has to stop for you if you're crossing, you hit the button.
Oh, that
Yeah.
thing, okay, I thought that was the rapid flashing.
Rapid flashing beacons are just signs on the side of the road that have a flasher,
Flashing yellow versus red.
which is
I
what
see.
the road commission currently allows. We'd have to get a special permit, I think, to do the hawk signals, but for this particular corridor, they're much
There's
safer.
one on Huron Street, you went downtown, but.
Yeah, I remember, yeah.
Yep, that's where there's one.
By the way.
There's one in Harvard.
Reminder, if everyone could, you know, talk like you're talking to the folks on Zoom a little bit, that will help them follow the conversation. Thanks.
All right, so an example is on Huron in Ann Arbor near the YMCA. That is a hawk.
Yeah, it was a hawk.
Was a hawk.
Now it's a full
That's a
signal.
full light, yeah.
So, I'm kind of focused on, like, there's so many great ideas flowing around here, like, I wanna see this, like, get decided, get paid for, get in motion. And so this is a movement that comes out of the environmental sustainability, group, is that right? No,
I think it came out of the
Came out-
planning commission.
planning commission, which environmental sustainability is part of,
also-
okay, but it's really the planning commission, okay. And is the idea that you're gonna be working in conjunction with the Downtown Development Authority in order to get some funding for this?
That's the key. We know that the DDA has some money. They, if I'm not speaking out of turn, Jen, they don't quite know what to spend it on. And so there's some projects that we think they can start to kickstart this a little bit. And, you know, some of these are gonna have to be driven by developers or the road commission, you know, larger infrastructure projects. But if we can start to pick off some of these smaller projects, those can kind of kickstart them. That's what we've seen happen on other projects around the state.
Any online questions?
And Zebro that you mentioned, there's quite a few crashes. Did you guys look at that? Because the crash incident number is pretty high compared to other, I mean, it's the highest on that corridor.
Yeah.
That's one of the higher in Washington County.
Yep.
Have you guys looked at things to improve safety there? Because it seems like people are generally, I go through, there's one today, there was one the other day.
Yeah.
People run the red light and get T-boned and some serious accidents. It's a lot of it's speed related and running red lights and how.
Yeah,
Do you ever look at ways to, because it's been a problem for 5 or 10 years and doesn't seem like it's really gotten any better.
we did look at that. We have some data on what types of crashes are most common there. And I think it's rear ends and side swipes, is that right?
Yeah, those are kind of the typical crashes you see at intersections, you know, those rear end side swipes. But like you mentioned, we are seeing a lot of those red light running related crashes, especially on that southbound movement on Zebra Road. So we do have some recommendations for that, you know, surrounding additional warning approaching the intersection, adjusting the signal timing, and generally slowing vehicles down is going to do a lot to help some of those types of crashes. So it's kind of it's going to be all of those recommendations combined to help reduce these number of crashes.
You mentioned slowing down cars a lot. There's specific speed you're targeting, because I think 30 is great personally. Throwing it out there.
There's a great paradox of speed management where you can only slow, or you can only get the speed limit down to what people are driving, or the 85th percentile of what people are driving. So the goal, I think,
It's 50, the speed limit is 50 now.
I think 35 to 40 is probably realistic. It's not ideal, which is why we want to move non-motorized users off the street.
Yeah.
And away from the curbs.
I mean, I think part of the problem is even at 35, it's still gonna be really loud.
Yeah.
Because I was walking along Jackson with my kids the other day, and I couldn't talk to them, it was so loud.
Yeah.
Even 35 is gonna be really loud.
It's gonna be loud. Part of that is just the road itself.
Yeah.
And the design of it, and we're kind of stuck with the gigantic median and the lanes that we have.
Why do you say that?
For the time being.
Well, we know what's there,
Low
but
hanging fruit.
that's, I mean, look at what Ferndale did. They took Woodward and narrowed it down and with bike lanes on Woodward. So it's not impossible. So I want to be careful about getting boxed in of thinking a certain way.
Yeah, I think it's not impossible long-term. What we're looking at over the next 10 years is doing as much as we can to slow vehicles down where we can, which, I don't know if we included the specific graphics, but taking the bike lanes off, moving the curbs to where the bike lane currently is, would allow for 11-foot lanes. And paired with the trees and a wider, cut sidewalk berm, would do a lot to get vehicles down to that 35-ish speed limit. It's gonna be loud just because there's a lot of vehicles.
Yeah.
You talk about
Getting the
Woodward
speed
is,
limit, getting people to ride the speed limit requires a speed trap.
Yeah.
Especially in the first few
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
of change on Jackson Road, but I hear you.
so
Probably not just one either.
we gotta do some geometric improvements and then
To get back here.
some enforcement stuff, so
Mm.
it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, so, when we envisioned, this project, I think one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob or Jan, one of the things that we wanted to change was the commercial zone. We wanted to be residential and commercial, mixed use. So in your presentation, you don't say anything about that, but maybe that's too granular for where we're at right now. But, that would add pedestrians in the corridor, as well as any other community people who want to be on the corridor with their bike or their feet. So that's one point I want to make. The other point I want to make is, you mentioned this a couple times in your presentation about bringing people to Scio. I'm more concerned about providing for the residents in Scio. For instance, recreational things that residents would like to do. We've lost a golf course, sorry about that. We lost a bowling alley, we've lost a theater. And now it's about a drink or eating. And we do have some recreation, we have pickleball and, so I just say that because you're gonna be involved in this for a while. That the residential piece along Jackson Road is important, okay? And secondarily, I think some ideas of improving enrichment opportunities for residents that are here. I think, like, for instance, the idea of farmer's market is a great idea. So I just kind of wanted to put those two pieces
Yeah,
in there. because-
your piece about mixed use, that's key to the development nodes that you'll see. And in the final report, you'll see,
I didn't see anything on your posters on residents, but residential.
in the actual report, there'll be some example images of what we're thinking here about. Combining, that mixed use type of development that has a lot of residential with activities as well.
And finally, I would say 10 years is a long time. And if we start out narrowing our scope and how we think about Jackson Road, that's what we're gonna end up, that scope. And so I would invite you to look at what they did in Ferndale on Woodward, mind you, Woodward Avenue. Because it can be done with effort, determination.
Will you tell the rest of us about what they did in Ferndale? Because I haven't seen it in years.
Well, I'll describe Woodward for those of you who've never been on Woodward at that part. It's 4 lanes on each side, and maybe some areas it's down to 3 lanes on each side with large islands in the middle. And what they did was they narrowed those lanes, they put in bike paths and walking paths in the roadway, yeah. They had to change some ordinance stuff. And they also developed, correct me if I'm wrong, Jan, because you were at this presentation. They pushed through a template for what they wanted to do along through their council. And so that was a really good way, the way they said, it was a good way to steer how development happened. What they wanted to do, not just some vague idea what they wanted to do, but they wanted to slow down. You have more pedestrian friendly crosswalks, biking, walking, etc. And so, but I think this SimCog study, this is a good place for us to start, but perhaps that's something we would want to think about. Yeah, It's not that I don't want people to come to Scio and spend their money. I do want people to come to Scio and spend their money, but I want to be mindful that we want to make sure that we're also doing things that create a better lifestyle for our residents too.
So, yeah, it was not intended to be something for out of towners to come in and take over. It's a supplement to make sure that the economics work.
Yeah, because we don't have a problem. People want to move here.
Yeah, right.
We. So sometimes development can be work as a negative for you, but that's a whole different subject.
All right, I want to make sure that I have enough time to talk with our folks on mine. The rest of the team is here.
Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and like Eric's gonna leave and he has a cubicle that he can do the Zoom room in. So I'll do the Zoom room and folks here, because you're here in person, we can thank Chris for picking up some cookies and some water. So that's the Betty of being here in person. And I'll set the Zoom room going and we can get into it a little more detail. Yeah, so Chris, I'll do the Zoom room if you back in.
Ferndale is there. 3 or 4 companies in a row work together, so. That's also. That's right.
Right. Thanks, everybody, for.
I just dropped it off. We don't need to ask them. Stay in touch with what the garbage plans are with your friend Jansen. No.
Blue dash spots. Wait, now.
Okay, so anyone on Zoom will be able to join in the Zoom room, and that's where you will finish up the meeting with your.
So these mid-block crossing, is these quarter mile increments or what was the spacing? Cause I remember I was at the last subcommittee, someone talked about the standard of the quarter mile.
So we talked about the standard being the quarter mile, but more putting an emphasis on where the bus stops are. So that's kind of like more so where you see, like right in between where the stops would be.
Okay.
And then where the stops become a little more sparse, especially for the triple ATA route, kind of just like, looking here, there could be some a little bit more in between here, but just as we go on, kind of looking